Hey all, here are OS Reviews. This is a quick comparison between the Google Pixel 6a and the Samsung Galaxy A54. Both of these are full HD resolution, 1080p, OLED displays which offer excellent contrast and viewing angles, although Samsung's panel does have a slight edge when it comes to brightness, reaching up to 1000 nits, so it's easier to see under direct sunlight, and also has a slightly faster refresh rate of up to 120 Hz compared to a standard 60 Hz panel on the Pixel 6a. And that means if you are scrolling super quickly through a really long list or website, the 120 Hz screen might seem just a little bit more smooth. Granted, under typical usage, both phones already feel fast enough and honestly quite fluid from a performance perspective. Now, in terms of screen size, the Pixel 6a measures 6.1 inches diagonally compared to 6.4 inches on the Galaxy A54. So Samsung is a slightly larger device in terms of footprint, especially since the frame here, in terms of bezels, might be just a hair larger than the 6a, but honestly, it's not too far apart. The Pixel is going to feel a little bit more compact, also because the plastic back slightly curves off onto the edges a little bit more smoothly, versus on the Samsung Galaxy A54, it's a little bit more of a flat design on the rear, so it feels a bit more boxy as you're holding the phone. Both phones feature optical under-display fingerprint scanners, which are relatively fast, although the placement of the A54 is actually a little bit lower than that of the Pixel. That being said, both are quite similar when it comes to overall speed and recognition in general. Now, when it comes to the build quality, as more of premium mid-range smartphones, I have to say that both Google and Samsung have done a good job here, although the approach is a little bit different. On the Google Pixel 6a, they've gone with a aluminum metal band on the sides, which then transitions into a polycarbonate plastic on the back of the phone. That is compared to the Samsung A54, which has a plastic frame on the outside instead of being made of metal. However, instead it has a glass back instead of plastic. So it's really a story of metal band versus a glass back, and they both feel quite premium for their price range, although my personal preference might lean a little bit more closely towards the Pixel in terms of that design choice, because plastic actually is a little bit more impact resistant in terms of it's not going to crack as easily if you drop it, while retaining a bit of that premium touch with that metal strip on the sides of the phone compared to Samsung's approach. But both are really not bad, and on the A54 you do have some metal accents on the camera array, which is etched in chrome and also makes it a little bit more resistant to wear and tear as well. Now, speaking of when it comes to the camera setup, on the Galaxy A54 we do have one extra lens that is visible. So on here there's a 50 megapixel primary sensor assisted by 12 megapixel ultra wide angle and another 5 megapixel macro lens for close-up shots. That is compared to the Google Pixel having a primary 12 megapixel lens and another 12 megapixel ultra wide, though there isn't going to be a third macro camera. So hardware wise, it seems like Samsung has a slight edge, but in practice, the computational photography, aka software processing algorithms built into Google's phones really takes their camera performance to the next level. And so even on camera hardware, again 12 megapixels on the primary lens, which doesn't seem to be too spectacular on paper, can still produce very, very strong looking results that are nearly flagship quality. Both phones do have IP67 water and dust resistance, so if you accidentally drop it into the shower or in a pool, it should still survive for both of these phones, although both will not have any Qi wireless charging support, which is kind of expected at this price point. Both phones, by the way, do have relatively large batteries. The A54 has a slight win in this department as the bigger phone. There is a 5000 milliamp hour capacity pack, which can be topped up at 25 watts, actually quite fast for a phone in this price range, and the Pixel 6a tops up at 18 watts, so a little bit slower, and it's a slightly smaller 4410 milliamp hour capacity cell instead. That being said, both of these phones have 5G enabled chips, and they're both 5 nanometers in terms of architecture size as well. On the Pixel 6a, it's using the first generation Tensor chip, versus on Samsung, they're using a Exynos 1380 chip. Now, when it comes to actual CPU and graphics performance, I would say that in day-to-day usage, they both feel actually quite fast and responsive, but technically the Tensor chip has a slight edge. This actually benchmarks closer to something like a Snapdragon 888, just a little bit shy of a Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, but still plenty of horsepower here, even for things that are more graphically demanding, such as gaming, versus the Exynos chip here is more of a mid-range option on par with some of the Snapdragon 7 Gen series chips, Snapdragon 700 series, and it's going to be still, again, very good for daily usage, but the GPU just is going to be a little bit weaker. If you are pressing it really hard for titles like Genshin, as well as PUBG, Asphalt series, that's where actually the Tensor will have a slight advantage in. Now, both of these phones, though, do have stereo speakers, including one at the bottom, and also one on the very top here to give you some extra separation as you're consuming media. In general, audio quality on both of these phones are excellent as you're watching back movies, especially with these OLED displays for things like YouTube and Netflix. It still remains quite enjoyable. Now, software-wise, we do have a very different approach from both of these companies. Google, of course, gives us a very clean, unsolicited version of Android that is completely stock, and you'll receive the OTA updates to the newest version of Android the day that they get dropped, compared to Samsung's One UI is going to be a lot more customized with Samsung's own versions of applications, including the Galaxy Store, in addition to the regular Play Store. So there's going to be a little bit more duplication in terms of you have Samsung's web browser as well as the regular Chrome browser as well. That being said, at least you have a lot of customization that you can tweak and try out if you want to change the way the phone looks and feels. So it's kind of a toss-up if you want more extra customization versus a cleaner software package, but both generally feel good enough as you're navigating around the UI and have a similar level of responsiveness, although international variants of the Galaxy A54 can come equipped with up to 8 gigabytes of RAM, so just a little bit more for multitasking, but 6 gigs is going to be the most common variant, especially here in the States. Otherwise, in terms of connectivity options, you have built-in NFC for contactless mobile payment on both of these phones, in addition to the standards like, again, built-in GPS, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. A quick look at some of the sample shots here of a plant. You can tell that overall both look quite good, although Samsung has slightly warmer, more saturated looking colors as part of their color tuning. That's kind of expected versus Pixel's being a little bit more neutral, but still quite beautiful to look at. And Pixel phones in general, including the 6A here, just might be a hair faster to snap when it comes to shutter speed. And that does mean that some of the fine details, if you are zooming all the way in, might just be a touch sharper by contrast, although both are looking already quite good and just is a little bit more consistent on the Pixel shooting experience because of the excellent computational photography. Again, camera quality being one of the main selling points on all of the Pixel series phones, including the A line. Not surprising considering they're using the same processor as on the more expensive Pixel devices. So on the A54, I would say it's just a hair shy of that. However, the camera capabilities of both phones are generally quite strong, and it's not saying that the A54 is shabby by any means. In fact, it already punches above its weight. Similarly, both phones do a pretty good job of auto HDR and retaining a lot of details, including the texture of clouds here in the background and also the trees here as well. And this is an example of the ultra-wide-angle lens on the Pixel as well as the A54 here side by side. So technically, the Samsung Galaxy A54 gets a little bit more within the frame of the shot when standing at the same position. That being said, there is slightly better lens distortion correction on the Pixel software, so everything still looks relatively straight even on the outer edges, versus we have slightly more of a curved look on the super wide-angle lens of Samsung. So both are very good shooters, though the 6A just has a slight edge up, I would argue, when it comes to consistency in some of those shots. Here's also a quick side-by-side speaker demo, so I'm going to turn up the volume on the Samsung here first. Now transitioning over to the Pixel. So again, with stereo separation on both of these phones, they both are quite immersive as you're consuming media in general. Although I would actually give a slight edge to the Samsung in this regard, where the bass actually sounds a little bit more full at maximum volume compared to the 6A. Sounds a little bit more thin by contrast, but again, both are very good, sounding loud enough and clean enough for just consuming media in general. Both phones are lacking 3.5mm headphone jacks, but you can use Bluetooth for wireless headphones and speakers, of course. Even areas like haptics, as well as the quality of the built-in microphones, are also quite similar. In fact, they're largely a toss-up and do feel quite tight and precise when it comes to the vibration motor, and very clear audio pickup as well. Now, some of the more advanced machine learning tricks that makes Pixel phones really smart are also starting to trickle down onto other Android smartphones, including ones from Samsung now. Case in point, we have live captions to automatically generate a subtitle even on videos that are lacking one using the onboard machine learning, even on the Galaxy A54, along with live transcription on both of these phones, which used to be a Pixel exclusive feature. So you're able to use the microphone to really parse what you're saying and give you a very clear as well as accurate sentence that you can then read back on the phone's display here. So that is more or less it as far as a very quick comparison between the Galaxy A54 as well as the Pixel 6A, and kind of an apples to oranges comparison because, again, the software experience is really really a case if you want something really customized versus something really stock and clean to vanilla Android. But at the end of the day, both are excellent value Android smartphones. You really can't go wrong with either one. Although on a spec per spec basis, I would argue the Pixel 6a, even though it's actually a slightly older device, is probably a even stronger value just because you do get a faster processor there with the Tensor chip that was once nearly flagship grade versus more of a mid-end chip on here. But for Samsung's phone, it has advantages including a brighter as well as a faster refresh rate OLED screen, slightly fuller sounding speakers, not to mention a slightly larger battery as well, which is going to last for just slightly longer than the Pixel 6a, although both phones can comfortably get through a day, if not a day and a half's use before you really have to top them up, and again, slightly faster charging speed on the Samsung device as well. And one final benefit here is this being a newer phone, it will technically receive slightly longer software update support. In fact, Samsung is quite impressive at the moment in how they are promising 4 years of OS level upgrades and 5 years of security upgrades. So technically the A54 should receive up to Android 17, which is crazy compared to up to Android 15 on the Pixel 6a, because this phone came out in 2022, it has already received 1 OS upgrade, Google provides 3 on here. So that is something to keep in mind if you are owning these phones for a longer duration of time. The software support, ironically enough, on Samsung, a third-party company, might actually be a little bit longer in that regard, although that's something that Google is slowly addressing on some of their newer phones from the Pixel 8 onwards, but obviously that's not going to be retrospective to older devices like the 6a. That being said, both phones looking ahead to the next year or two should still be fully supported and run flawlessly without really any problems. But ultimately, what do you guys think? Which phone might be a better fit for you? Let us know in the comments below. You can find out more details as well as the original in-depth review on both of these phones on our channel as well. But for now, thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. It's been just a closer look at some of the similarities and differences between the Pixel 6a and the Galaxy A54.